Welcome to another episode of Food Chain with me, Prince Apia. In this edition, we'll bring you coverage from Kentucky, Lexington in the US. We'll be talking about global agriculture and talk about how Ghana can benefit from the new innovations in the agriculture space across the world. My name is Prince Apia. Thank you for joining us in this edition. Stay with us. Joy News broken chain investigations have shown that the continuous exportation and smuggling of soya bean and other grains to neighboring countries is destroying the poultry industry. These commodities constitute the feed for the poultry, which is the lifeblood of the poultry sector, without which there is no industry. Globally, there are indications that this situation could get worse if nothing is done about it. Justin Sherrard is global strategist animal protein with Rabobank, a Dutch multinational financial services.
There are quite some challenges in global poultry markets at the moment. Most of this is about the high cost of inputs, principally feed. Agri-commodity prices are very high, and beyond that we also have some increases in energy costs, transportation costs, labour costs. So we've got some real increase on the input side. And when we see that, we're pushing up the price, we wonder how consumers are going to respond to that. When you see higher prices, are you going to start consuming less? So this is where we are at the moment as we head further into 2022 and we look into 2023 with this period of high input costs.
The poultry industry situation, according to researchers, will be compounded by the Russia-Ukraine impasse together with other challenges. Mr. Sherrard projects 2023 might be another difficult year for the industry.
There are a number of things that could happen with agri-commodities as we think about the next growing season and look into 2023. I think the weather is always a consideration because we've got some dry weather in North America and also in South America, which are such important markets in terms of global agri-commodity production. These are the basic feed commodities that so much of the poultry industry around the world relies on. But beyond that, we also wonder if we're going to see some erosion on the demand side around, how much animal feed we actually require. So we've got some pressures in terms of will we get the yield that we want? And remember, of course, that we also have high fertiliser costs. And with high fertiliser costs, we may see more limited application of fertiliser, which creates a bit of a penalty on the yield side. So we could see quite tight supply going right into 2023, and we also may see demand coming off a little bit. But on balance, when we think about these competing factors, we believe that actually prices for agri-commodities, for the feed that goes into so much of the poultry industry, are going to remain at high levels going into 2023. Well, I think if you consider the feed formula that is used in poultry, and I'm not talking here specifically about layers or about chicken meat, broilers, but if you think about both of them, we're going to see producers optimising the feed ration, the recipe, to utilise whatever lower cost feed commodities they can get their hand on. So maybe there's a different grain which is available, different oil seed or seed meal which is available locally, which they can utilise, a byproduct of some food production, for example. If they've got a cost benefit in using it, even if there's a slight penalty on the production side, they'll go to optimise, reduce the cost, and maybe take a little bit of a longer cycle in the process, but hope that they end up ahead. And I think this is one of the great things about poultry, that we have this flexibility.
An animal nutrition expert, Dr. Sahim Salami, is a research fellow at Altec, an international company that researches and produces agricultural products. He says it is about time Ghana and other African countries alike invest in local alternative protein sources for poultry feed to save the industry.
When you look at the poultry business, the bulk of the variable cost of production comes down to the feed. So feed production accounts for about 60 to 70% of the cost of production. It means if you have to improve the economic viability of that industry, feed production or feed costs have to be a major target. Now, one of the problems in Africa which we have to resolve is the over-dependence on importation of feed materials, especially, let's say, soybean meal, which is very, very vulnerable to price volatility on the global market. That means that in Africa, we need to start thinking of how to grow local alternative protein sources locally. And we have the resources, we have the land, we have the human capital to do this production. So we need to start looking more into investing into local production of feed resources. And another way is also looking more into tapping into alternative byproducts in the feed. So alternative byproducts are byproducts from industries like let's say beering industry, or perhaps food juice industries. How do we actually harness these resources into feeding them into poultry? And we can also tap into the opportunity of feeding technologies like enzymes. Now, those enables us to actually use more of alternative byproduct in the diet. So the major focus here should be reducing the dependence on importation, because most of those feed resources that we import into Africa actually are very vulnerable to price volatility on the global market. So we need to start producing some of those feed resources locally, look more into making the feed cheaper with the use of alternative byproducts. We can enhance that with the use of nutritional technologies like enzymes, which actually increase the digestibility of such byproducts.
The annual Altec One Idea Conference brought together thousands of scientists, researchers, businesses, including journalists from across the world to Kentucky in the US. The purpose was to discuss global agricultural events and innovations, technologies, and find solutions to some of the problems that the world is facing.
I think it gives an opportunity to exchange about the big challenges in agriculture and the food sector. And here I think we have really an open-minded exchange, how we can look into the future and how we also can look at the big challenges that we all face. I think it opens our eyes and our minds. It gives us idea to look for solutions about climate change, about how we can manage that all people get food, get enough food, and get healthy food. I think all these basic questions that we, as journalists, but also as whole agriculture sector in the global world are facing, we can exchange and we can look for opportunities together, and we can take something home. There are so many workshops and ideas that there's something in it for everybody. Also, we come from different contexts, and I think also for the global south, for Africa, there are ideas, there are opportunities. It's not all that you can take home, but it's a lot, and you pick what you think can help, you take it home, you try to translate that your audience, your people can also profit from this.
For me, this was a really powerful conversation, to the extent that they are thinking as much about the present as they are thinking about the future. And I'll relate that to the conversation around climate change. Most of the times when a lot of the conferences and the conversations come up, then they're asking questions like, if we have 1.5 degree increase in the temperature of the earth going into the future, things will feel terrible. Then points are made that in 30 years the world population will hit 10 billion plus, and then it's problematic. A lot of the conversations are usually future focused. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's good that we pay attention to the future, but we need to properly contextualize the present before we plan for the future. And at the One Ideas conference, for example, then I hear a lot of conversation about the present and how to deal with the challenges of the present, even as we think about the future. And for me, that's an exciting thing, and it's one of the learnings that I think all of us working into conversations and conferences and discussions should keep that in mind, even as we have some of those conversations. The One Ideas conference, for example, had like 3,000 or so people participating. But how many human beings do we have in the world? Somewhere in the billions. So the key role journalists play is they are within some of these spaces, pick up on the important things and tell them in story format so that others outside these conference venues are able to then pay attention and get to know about that and join the movement in dealing with the challenges that these conferences are aimed at doing. So that's one very important aspect of why journalists like yourself, like myself, should participate in these conversations. But the second point is, when we have all these business leaders, political leaders, governance, leaders and all, in conversations like this, they make promises, they give assurance, they lay out plans. And so someone needs to pay attention to how some of these plans and promises and assurances are being implemented. Otherwise, then we all walk out of the space and everyone goes to sleep. And that is also a very large part of the work that journalists should be doing. The watchdog role, tracking some of these promises and assurances. So I look forward to probably seeing you at the next One Ideas conference. I may not be there, but maybe I'll read about what you report from that conference.
Sure, I look forward to that as well.
Agriculture will make the big difference in feeding people and minimizing climate.
The climate crisis is the big...
So it's our belief that agriculture has the greatest positive potential to influence the future of our planet.
So a lot of discussions have been going on here at the Altec One conference, ranging from animals to human settlement and other farming practices that are very critical to the growth of local economies and global economies alike. The issues around climate change have also taken center stage over here, and the reason for these things have also been the fact that individuals and corporate institutions must come together to form synergies and create businesses out of the challenges being faced to address the challenges being faced by global farming industries.
I think through COVID we have seen the importance of agriculture, especially also in our countries in Western Europe. The consumer and politics face that agriculture play a key role for the people in the countries, and the food sector is very important. The country that thought, food is always available, is always there, is not always the case, because the chains that brought food to the people were distracted, and the importance of farmers was brought into consciousness of the people. They realized, it's important that we have our own farms, our farmers in our countries. And in our agriculture in Switzerland, the sales direct from the farms, the farm shops, they had a boom. It's a big trend that farmers sell their food directly to the consumer. It went up during the 2 years of COVID, and it's still higher than it was before. So it really brought in the minds of people the importance of agriculture. It brought this knowledge. It brought back agriculture is very important for our society. I think it's very important that we inform about what's going on in the relationship between the consumer, between politics, the society, and also that a healthy nutrition, healthy food is important for healthy people. And when we have challenges like COVID with viruses and all that stuff, and people have a healthy diet, this helps that we are not that all this whatever arrives is not such a threat to the health of the people. And we as agricultural journalists should inform about it and ask the questions. On one hand to the politicians, but also the consumers and to the health sector, and bring this together and help inform the people, and especially build trust among the among the different audiences, build trust also among the specialists, that the whole society where agriculture is important, to build on this.
So climate change is having a significant impact, not just on agriculture, but on the planet generally. So the impact of climate change is basically coming from greenhouse gas emissions. And livestock, when you look at specifically the livestock production sector, contributes about 14.5% of the impact on greenhouse gas emission globally. So there is a big discrepancy when you look at that number. That's just a global average number, which is 14.5%, greenhouse gas emission coming from the livestock industry. But that majority of, emission intensity, it's also coming from emerging countries, which include Africa. So that means Africa has a very big role, or let me say emerging countries, developing countries, have a big role to play in terms of, contributing to production efficiency, in terms of protein production, and also reducing greenhouse gas emission. Because at the end of the day, we all have one planet. So the impact of greenhouse gas emission or climate change is not going to be locally specific alone. It's going to affect everyone. And definitely it's time for Africa to also look into contributing to reduction in climate change. Yeah, let me give you a very good example of why it is very important for Africa, or let me say emerging countries generally. There is a data that came out from the IFCN, which is more like an international dairy network, and they actually looked at the greenhouse gas emission coming from the global dairy industry. 25% of the global emission coming from the dairy industry is actually coming from the developed world, while 75% is coming from the emerging world. Now, if you look at that proportion of emission, 25% from developed world, the larger proportion of the meat production in the world is actually coming from the developed world, and they only contribute 25%. So we, in science, we actually call that situation an emission gap. That is to say, there is a big gap between what you would term as a highly productive systems in terms of the emission, and what you would term as, a system where the production is very low. You should have expected that the emission should be lower, but in this situation, it is different. The emission is actually very higher in developing countries. And what that actually tells us is that there is something that the developed world is doing differently that the developing world is not doing. So which is in terms of improving production efficiency. So the major part where I think developing world could actually play a role here is to look at improving feed management, nutritional management. There's a whole lot of work that can be done in improving, the supply of feed, especially for ruminant production systems. We've all been doing a lot of pastoralism in Africa, and this doesn't really help in improving rangeland management and also reducing enteric maintained production. So what we can do now is to actually get support from the government, international government included, in terms of training farmers on how they can actually produce more forages, high quality forages, and also conservative forages, silages, silages and hay, which can help to improve feed management. Now again, another part is the health management. So health management is very important because, again, when you have unhealthy animals, sick animals, they are less productive. Then that means that you are getting less in terms of productivity from an animal that's actually producing a lot of greenhouse gas emission contribution. So, other part of the equation is also in terms of looking at the breeding efficiency. That's coming down to the genetic aspect. We have a lot of work to do on getting genetics of breeds that are very productive for African specific climates. So this is also an area where farmers have to understand that they have to adopt, breeds that are also very good for that local environment. So in the past, let me give you an example of Nigeria. For example, we have a disease called trypanosomiasis, which is also tsetse fly, and it has always affected the productivity of ruminant animals. So getting vaccination developed and also getting adequate disease control is very important. So I think education will play a big role extensive education. So it will play a big role in educating farmers on what to do to improve breeding efficiency, health management, or nutrition, or even also selecting the right animals that will deliver the right productivity. But it's still a whole lot of work to be done. But I can imagine that with international commitment coming in, we have what we call the Global Maintain Pledge that comes out of the COP26, that happened in Glasgow last year. And over 100 countries have actually pledged to that. And what that pledge looks like is that by 2030, those countries have to reduce their emissions, maintain emissions by 30%. So Africa has to also follow the global trend once you signed up to that kind of pledge. And that enteric maintain emission from ruminants especially is a big part of the equation to achieve that target. I think the global commitment is not going to come from the government, it has to come from businesses also. Now, largely, one of the major things you understand about Africa, for example, is that apart from the poultry sector, which is very highly organized and have a kind of business arrangement or structure in place, the ruminant part doesn't have that kind of structure in place. It's very extensive. Now, if we want to gain commitment from government, we need to also understand that that commitment is going to come not just from the government but also from private businesses. Now, the opportunity for private businesses is that they can also sell sustainability as a business opportunity for international reputation, and that is where I think businesses in Africa will also tap into the fact that it is not just reducing greenhouse gas emission, it's also about selling the brand reputation of sustainable business to the international world.
So what are the lessons Ghana can draw from the global agriculture discussions that went on at the ALTEC conference? My colleague Joseph Opoku Gakpo, who was part of the conference, has been sharing some thoughts with Emma Davis.
Usually there's a lot of talk. Mainly the point is, how do we practicalize the kind of conversations that we have? We can talk of all the wonderful ideas, but unless we take the necessary steps to implement the kind of policies and the programs that will really make a difference, then we are going nowhere. And one of those very interesting points that come up, and let me in the next few seconds bring this home. You referenced the conference here in Accra and ensuring green entrepreneurship and all of that, but the Achimota forest is on the verge of being turned into something else, and that's worrying. If we can't protect what we have, what's the guarantee that what we're doing afresh would actually make a difference? So that's the other bit of it, that we have the conversations, we make the commitments, we come up with the plans, let's follow through and ensure it's successful implementation. President and CEO of ALTEC, in one of the speeches closing the session, raised concern about how the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has worsened the food security situation all over the world, including here in Ghana. So over the last 2 years or so, the estimation of the figures are that more than 0.3 million people here in Africa alone have moved from circumstances of hunger into extreme hunger situations. So then it's definitely worrying, and the reason it's become so is as follows. There are concerns about the supply chain, because then there were huge disruptions when it comes to industries working and producing the necessary inputs, which we are yet to recover from. I found it exciting that in somewhere in a different part of the world, the conversations around dealing with food insecurity challenges was actually focusing on the continent where I live, which is God knows how many kilometers away. My key takeaway will be that it's about time that as a people as well, we took a bit more interest in dealing with some of these challenges. The figures are very startling. I have paid attention to the figures that the Ministry of Food and Agriculture itself has put out, detailing the rise in food prices over the last 2 years or so. Between January and October alone, we saw situations of basic food commodities, whether it's yam, whether it's cassava, whether it's tomato, going up to the region of 74% in terms of the increment just between the beginning and the end of 2021. The situation has lessened over the last few months, and there is almost zero guarantee that it will slow down. So my point is, we need to have a conversation around some of these challenges and fix the problems. One of the key ways around fixing it is localizing our food supply chain. It doesn't make sense that We still spend more than $2 billion importing food annually, including foods like rice, that more than enough of it can be grown in places like Aveime and others. So that's obviously something that we need to pay attention to. And for me, it goes back to the appropriate investment, the necessary prioritization, less propaganda, and really doing the things that matter, like making the necessary investment and building the food chain from bottom up and not as a top-down kind of approach. Well, the key point is we can't joke with our food systems and hope that we'll become a better nation. We have had a situation where investment in agriculture has not been as fulfilling as we've all expected. So one of the key points that came up at the One Ideas conference was, let's pay as much attention to nutritional insecurity as we pay to food insecurity. So the vitamins that are needed, the proteins, the minerals that actually help ensure a healthy body. Let's take the steps and make the necessary efforts to make all of those available. Let's make the investment in the agricultural value chain. Let's invest more in our seed systems. I think that's very much important. Let's see what we can do with our irrigational facilities. But most importantly, let's build a connection between the farm and the consumption so that when the farmer plants, he's able to make enough money from the produce at the end of the season. So he's inspired to go back to the field. And that comes in different formats, ensuring adequate storage facilities, subsidies here and there for the ordinary farmer, because no farmer does well anywhere in the world without adequate subsidies. And government is the best organization to help rally the rest of us around, including the private sector, to really get this done.
Well, it has been an exciting episode of Food Chain with me, Prince Appiah. We brought this to you all the way from Lexington, Kentucky in the United States of America. I hope you join us same time next week for another exciting episode of Food Chain.